Hi, my name is Assistant Chief Troy Price with the Vancouver Police Department. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about body-worn cameras and what we've done to begin the process of reviewing a body-worn camera system. A little overview of what we're going to do today. We'll talk about the definitions of what body cameras are. We'll talk about what a body-worn camera program would look like with the Vancouver Police Department, including an in-car camera system. We felt that that would be appropriate, and that's what our community would desire, is to have that coverage of what goes on inside of our vehicles as well as what is going on when we are interacting with the public. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of our body-worn camera program and review. We'll talk about the types of systems that are available. We'll talk about in-car camera features, also the desired body-worn camera features that we would be looking for. We'll also talk about data storage, which is a big piece of a program, which is actually just saving that information. There are also privacy considerations, public records requests, which we'll get into that in a little bit, and then lessons learned. We did go to other agencies and ask them, hey, if you had to do your program all over again, what would you do differently? And we're trying to learn from their mistakes. We'll also talk about anticipated increases in personnel to manage such a program, and then we'll conclude. A quick definition, body-worn camera, and this is coming from the Bureau of Justice Administration. This is their definition, and we agree with it. It's officer body-worn cameras are relatively small devices that record interactions between community members and law enforcement officers. The video and audio recordings from body-worn cameras can be used by law enforcement to demonstrate transparency to their communities, to document statements, observations, behaviors, and other evidence, and to deter unprofessional, illegal, and inappropriate behaviors by both law enforcement and the public. And so as we began to develop this program and look at what it would appear to be here in the city of Vancouver, we were looking at a three-camera system, in essence, and they would all be working as one, meaning that the cameras would be on usually at the same time, giving a more 360 view of what was occurring. And so one camera mounted on the police officer and two in the vehicle, one looking forward out over the hood and one looking into the rear seat in the passenger compartment. The body-worn cameras, the one actually worn by the officers, and if you'll see on the right-hand side of this slide, these are all images captured by body-worn cameras. They are fixed to the front of the officer, and we'll talk about the different ways the different types of cameras and how they are affixed to the officer. They record both audio and video. They're designed to capture interactions between police and members of the public. They can be switched off or placed into an audio-only mode. Some people would say, well, why would you want that? And there are times when an officer might take a statement from an individual and video, they don't agree to being recorded with video, or due to the nature of the situation, they may ask to only be recorded by audio. The in-car systems, and I'll talk about these in two different pieces. The camera that looks out over the hood and you'll see to the right-hand side of your screen a few pictures there. One is at the top is a police officer effecting an arrest. The middle is a police officer administering field sobriety test, and the one at the bottom there just happened to be in the right place at the right time to capture a collision. These are affixed to the dashboard or the headliner of the vehicle. They, again, record both video and audio, and they're designed to capture incidents occurring in front of the vehicle and in the rear passenger compartment of the vehicle. And again, they can be switched off or placed into audio-only mode. Here's a few pictures of images captured by, in the rear of a police vehicle captured by an in-car camera system. These are really important because they are a safety device for our officers because they can show if a suspect might be trying to bring their handcuffs from the back to the front, slipping them under their legs and bringing them to the front. It can show if a suspect is trying to retrieve contraband from someplace that's hidden on their person that may not have been captured in a search. It can also show behavior of an arrested person where they may be hitting their head on the window, and also will capture statements by them. So it's a useful device, and it helps to show what happens in the back seat of the car. There are a lot of times there might be allegations that something occurred in the back seat of the car, and it's nice to have video to show, no, this is what actually occurred. I'd like to talk a little bit about the timeline of how things have progressed in our body-worn cameras program. The project officially started back in April of 2019, and it was through that we learned a great deal because we went out and talked to various agencies. We put together a team of people to make contacts with various agencies who already have body-worn camera programs, and to basically do as much research as we could on the topic. Initially, we thought, well, it would be a pretty simple deal. We'll just purchase some cameras, we'll train our people on how to use them, we'll enact some policy, and we're off and running. We learned that nothing is ever quite as simple as it initially seems. We started our vendor demos in September of 2019, and that's when we had vendors come in with their products and demonstrate them for us. It was through that we learned that there's just literally hundreds of different ways to employ one of these programs, and it seems that everyone has gotten into that business. In November of 2019, our vendor demos ended, and I will say officially ended. We actually, as recently as this year, 2020, we had a couple more demos, but it officially ended in November of 2019. It was at that point that we thought we had seen enough of the different systems to develop a list of desired features that we would want our camera system to have. And so in January of 2020, a brief on the body-worn camera system and a program was actually created, and a rough cost estimate was produced. We began the process of community engagement by forming a committee to decide how would we reach out to the public and see what they felt about these systems and gather their opinions and their input in March of 2020. And then, of course, COVID-19 came, and that put the brakes on the whole process. We didn't know where we would be in terms of priority for our camera system, so we put things on hold. And later in 2020, I believe it was around August, this began to move into the realm of the task force for them to consider, where would this be on the list of priorities for our police department. And so that's kind of where we are right now, as we're kind of in this holding pattern, waiting to see when this will be the priority and at what point people would like to move forward. I'll talk a little bit about the body-worn camera platforms, and we're not talking about the in-car systems. This is just what's worn on the body, and we came across essentially three categories of cameras. There's the one on the left there, which is your basic body-worn camera. It's affixed to the front of the officer. It fastens onto their shirt or onto their vest carrier that they might be wearing. And it's usually clipped on, or they have some pretty powerful magnets that one goes inside the shirt and one on the outside, and one is on the back of the camera, and it holds it in place pretty well. That's the most popular kind. There is an emerging line of cameras that are essentially cell phones, and the picture on the right shows exactly what that looks like. And basically, it uses your cell phone to capture images. And then at the very bottom, you see one that's mounted on the eyeglasses of the officer. Those are kind of the three basic categories of body-worn cameras. I'm going to talk a little bit about after we did all of our research, what we thought our camera system should have, the one that provided the greatest ease of use and provided the most data for people to review later on when they want to see what our cameras are capturing. And so our recommended features, and these are the ones that came from our committee, were, of course, we want simple operation. They should be easy to use. It shouldn't be an officer has to flip a switch, push a button, turn something on or off to capture information. It should be very simple to use. One button to push to get it going, one button to push to make it stop. Also, the cameras have to last us a whole shift. That means battery life has to give us a whole shift and then some. There would be no use in having a battery that lasted 8 hours when our folks are out on the road for a 10-hour shift. And if they are held out at a scene because something happened towards the end of the shift, then they might be out there even longer. So we said full shift plus battery life on these cameras. Also, we want them to hold up to the rigors of the work that we do. Things get dropped, things are, they get wet. We work in a very wet environment here in the Pacific Northwest, so we wanted them to be very durable. Also, we wanted the images captured to be clear, so we said a minimum of 720p resolution, and that's a minimum. Of course, we would like to see more. Of course, the higher the resolution, the more data that is, and that's the more data that has to be stored. But a minimum of 720p resolution. We also thought that, since our folks work at night, how about a low light feature or something that allows that camera to see in periods of darkness and low light. Because things break and no equipment is perfect, we wanted a warranty that would last for the entire period of the contract, the length of the contract. This next feature is, I'll give a little bit of a background for it and give a scenario. So if an officer were speaking to someone or were to observe something while his or her camera was on, and they want to mark that period on the video so that they don't have to go through hours of video just to find that one thing, we wanted it to have what's called bookmarking, which is a feature where our officers can possibly just tap a button and that puts an electronic bookmark onto the video so that it makes it something very easy to go back and find. We wanted the cameras to also have an audio-only mode whereby they could be used to take a statement from a witness or a victim during an incident. Again, there are people who would refuse to be interviewed on camera, but they might provide an audio interview. So that should be a feature that is a feature that we would like to see on the cameras as well. We want there to be an audible confirmation that the camera has started recording and an audible confirmation that the camera has stopped recording. So just hitting a button and assuming that the camera is recording isn't good enough, because an officer might have hit the button, and so it might not be depressed all of the way, and wearing gloves might make it feel like the camera button was pushed, but it wasn't. So some type of audio confirmation that the camera is now recording or the camera has stopped recording is going to be essential. We'd also like to be able to remotely activate cameras, especially in an instance where a dispatch might not be able to get a hold of an officer. There are instances where officers have been out on a scene and are engaged in a fight and have lost their radio, or it's come off the radio has come off in the fight. Dispatch is unable to reach them, and it would be nice to be able to activate their camera to see exactly what's going on, especially when they're not coming up on the air. And so we saw that as an essential feature as well. We'd also like to have live stream capability. What that gives us is the ability to see what's going on, especially in events like some of the civil unrest events that we've experienced, to have our officers on the street able to provide that live streamed data back to a command post, so for situational awareness for those who are making decisions about where to deploy people and how to keep our public safe out there while people are expressing their First Amendment privilege. We also wanted something that's called auto triggers, and that's I need to describe that just a little bit. The simpler a system is, the fewer opportunities there are for error. An officer in the heat of a situation or a moment might not think to tap the button to start a recording. I could think of situations where an officer might be conducting a traffic stop, and just as they're about to pull over and start the recording, the person driving the other vehicle jumps out of their car and might have a gun, or they jump out and run away, and the officer has to react to these things. Having them take that extra step to think to hit the button while they're trying to react to whatever the situation is a bit much. And so having auto triggers is a very helpful feature. That feature would actually turn the camera on for the officer within a certain set of parameters. So let's say whenever the emergency lights on the car are turned on, a signal could be sent to the camera to automatically turn itself on. Or when an officer is driving in excess of a certain speed, the cameras could turn on. Or say if an officer were involved in a foot pursuit, was to begin chasing someone, the camera could, sensors in the camera would automatically turn it on. Or in the instance where an officer were to draw their weapon out of the holster, a sensor in the holster would trigger the camera to turn itself on. There are several different scenarios under which these auto triggers could be configured, but it would be for those purposes of making it easy for the officer. The officer doesn't even have to think about the camera. They can just do the work that they are out there to do. So we would want auto triggers. We'd also like to have that data streamed to the cloud. Now, there's various ways of doing this. Some of the systems that we reviewed required the officers to come back, take their camera, place it into a docking station, and then the information is pulled off of the camera and sent up to the cloud where it was stored. Other systems actually streamed the information directly from the camera to the cloud for storage. And then we'd also like to have a hardware upgrade somewhere in the middle of the contract. It's a feature offered by many vendors already. I think it's a great feature to have because it would continue to move the department to the newest cameras that the vendor is offering, and with no additional cost for that. Also, the fact that these cameras wear out over time, and it's just replacing that camera with the newer equipment that's been put to market by the vendor. I want to talk a little bit about in-car camera features. They have to be simple to operate again. Again, we want 720p resolution. We'd like there to be a low light feature for those cameras. We work at night and daytime, and so a low light feature is essential. A warranty that goes for the length of the contract as well. And I'll pause here and say that most contracts are a 5-year contract, and then we renew. There should be an audio-only mode. There should be a bookmarking feature for those as well. A minimum of a 160-degree field of view, and that's within industry standards. I think industry standards are somewhere between 130 and 170. So a minimum of 160 for a field of view. Auto triggers for that, meaning that for the in-car camera, when that back door is opened, the camera would start. And so it would record somebody being placed into the back of the car, and it would continue to run until it was turned off. Data would automatically be streamed to the cloud, and we'd like that as well. We'll talk a little bit about the system and software features we'd like to see for our camera program. Of course, we have to have user-friendly redaction software. Understanding that we live in the state of Washington. Washington has very non-restrictive laws on public data requests. So if someone were to request video from an incident, we would provide that to them pursuant to the laws of the state. And before that video can go out, someone has to sit down with the video and redact information that should not be there. Of course, people aren't always addressed to go outside into public, and some of those images might be captured. The faces of small children might be captured. People providing their social security number and address might be captured. So all these things, both video and audio, have to be gone through by one of our record specialists to either blur a face or redact audio of sensitive information before that information can go out and in response to a public data request. That takes a lot of time. And so all the vendors, or most of the vendors, offer some software package that makes that possible, but it needs to be easy to use because it is quite time consuming. We need our system to be able to integrate with our evidence system, meaning that that data needs to be, data that would be considered evidence in a case should be able to easily transition from the camera or from the cloud into our evidence system here at the police department. We also would like full integration with our computer automated dispatch software, also known as CAD. And that is where if an officer is on a call and is capturing video, the system should be able to pull information from CAD to give that, to label the call type, be it a domestic violence or a traffic stop or a field contact, and store that data on the video as well. And that helps us later on down the line with capturing data for knowing what our folks are doing, and it helps set the retention schedule for that data. It helps set how long we have to hold on to that data before the law says we can release it or purge it. We'd like enterprise licenses and not to have to buy a license for each and every person, where the department would purchase one license and it covers the entire department, so that we're not buying additional licenses each time we have a new employee come on board. Also, review licenses for the prosecutors. One of the major customers of this data is the prosecutor's office. So we would need them to be able to either be part of our enterprise license or have licenses for them, just so that they are able to review the data in preparation for their cases for court. Again, our system, we want that live streaming capability and remote activation, as we mentioned earlier. Over-the-air upgrades. In other words, we don't have to wait for someone from the vendor to come and upgrade our software. We like our software or our cameras to be upgraded over the air or through some electronic means that doesn't require the vendor to come on site. We're going to talk a little bit about data storage. And there's basically two options. We can either purchase a server and have that information stored on site, or upload it to the cloud, which is basically using someone else's server. Our recommendation is and our preferred method of holding on to data would be to upload it to the cloud and to have unlimited data storage with the vendor. We'll talk a little bit about privacy considerations. In understanding the nature of police work, we're often called into situations where people didn't have time to get dressed appropriately for the police, or people might have small children running around inside the home. And so we have to be cautious when we go into people's homes and we're capturing video. We have to be careful to make sure that they understand that that we're recording, and also when it comes to what we're going to talk about next, which is public disclosure requests, that sensitive private information is not being released. So we have to be especially cautious of people's rights to privacy, and what we're capturing. And so, and there's a balancing test there of, what is appropriate for release and what isn't, and also what would be private and what would not be private. And so developing sound policy that advises our officers to let people know, hey, I am recording you, or I have a recording device on, is essential. And whenever it is possible to do that, officers should do so. We'll talk about public disclosure requests as well. One of the reasons that so few agencies, and I'll give two reasons, most agencies in the state of Washington are shying away from body-worn cameras, has to do with the cost of the system, and it's not a cheap option. If you do it right, it's not. And public disclosure requests. Again, I said earlier that our state is very non-restrictive when it comes to what data, what public data must be disclosed. And so we understand that people will make requests for video. In speaking with other agencies who have programs and asking them, what's been the roughest piece of this in the state of Washington, it has been responding to these requests. And it's just because it takes so long to process these, where in the past, when someone asked for documents, it was simply a matter of, and it still wasn't a simple matter, but it was a matter of going and finding those documents, reading through them, and editing, redacting any information that shouldn't go out to the public. Or now it will be video, which could be hours and hours of video, and going through it and blurring faces and audio redacting personal private information. So it's a much heavier lift. And so in realizing that this brings a lot of weight in terms of workload, we understand that we are going to have to staff up properly for that. So that brings us to staffing recommendations and what it would look like here. And this is additional staffing to support the program. It would require one person to basically run the program. We call them a camera technology program coordinator, but you could use any technical name there that says it has something to do with cameras. But we need someone who is there to replace broken cameras, keep control of inventory, make sure our folks are trained up, update the software on the cameras. That be-all, know-all guru that helps manage the program. In speaking with our information technology department, they indicated that this is a pretty good lift for them as well, and they would ask for one additional person to assist us with the technical part of the program. And I was, on our last slide, I was talking about public disclosure requests. And so eventually we would end up with 3 additional record specialists or records clerks, because they're the ones that process those requests. And then, if you think about it, all of the data that's captured on these cameras actually is evidence to some degree or another, and that it's going over to the city prosecutor's office and the city attorney's office, and has to be reviewed by someone. That's quite a bit when you have, say, 150 to 170 officers with body cameras on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. That's quite a bit of video. And gleaning from that video the pieces that are essential for prosecution takes quite a bit of work. And so that would be an addition, based on that number of cameras, the recommendation would be 3 additional staff at the city attorney's office to assist with that review of data. We'll talk a little bit about lessons learned from the other agencies. One of the first things that was told to us repeatedly by other agencies was conduct a full cost of ownership assessment. That is, don't just look at the cost of the cameras. And quite honestly, the cost of the cameras is negligible, because oftentimes there have been grant monies from the federal government available to make the camera purchase, and that becomes like the cheapest part. But also the cost of getting your folks trained up, the cost of installing the equipment into your cars, the cost of having the additional personnel on hand to help with managing the program, managing the data, reviewing the data, doing the redactions, and responding to public disclosure requests. Several agencies did not take these things into consideration, and several agencies actually ended their programs after starting them just purely because the costs were not fully realized on the front end. And they had to tell their communities, no, we can't do this anymore. We just can't sustain it. We underestimated what it would cost, and we just can't do it. Which is part of that is we have to determine what our additional staffing needs are. I think we landed fairly solidly on what that would look like with the additional staffing in our records division with the city attorney's office and bringing folks on board to manage the program. We were told, listen, involve your prosecutor in the process, because the prosecutor is the one who is the ultimate end user for this data. It ends up in the hands of the prosecutor, and we respond to the city attorney's office and the county prosecutor as well to make sure that they are on board with and that they fully understand the camera program we are instituting, so that they can have an idea of what they will need to review that data, to manage how that data comes to them as evidence for their cases. One of the other hurdles that some agencies have come across is policies. And they said, hey, listen, our recommendation is develop your policies ahead of time. Don't develop them as you go along like we did and make mistakes and have to backtrack and do things over. And so developing the policies ahead of time. One of the parts of our committee's review as we looked at this was to just gather policy from agencies all over the country, as well as some policies from organizations that help with that help guide law enforcement agencies in producing protocols and policy that are considered industry standards. And so they said, hey, just get this done on the front end. And so that's what we would aim to do. We would make sure that our retention schedules are consistent with the statutory requirements for the state of Washington. And so that's making sure that as those videos are categorized, that they are appropriately categorized and that they are retained for that length of time and then done away with. Otherwise, we would end up overburdening the servers that we're trying to store this data on. Of course, things that are for major incidents would be held on to for much longer periods of time than things that were just the no incident traffic stop. Then it would be on the regular retention schedule. They also told us, hey, listen, you're going to break one of these cameras, and so you're going to need to keep spare equipment on hand. And so they say there's an industry term, they say hot extras, which basically is a camera that is fully functioning that can be used to replace one that is broken in the field. One of the other things that a lot of people don't realize is that labor groups have to be interacted with. When it comes to this, body cameras are a change in the working environment, and because of this, we would need to communicate with our labor groups to make sure that they're on board, that they understand what we're trying to accomplish, that they are in agreement with the way that we're going about it, and that we have bargained with them regarding having cameras on our officers and in their cars. One of the other recommendations was don't buy. Unless there's an overwhelming need to, don't buy a system that's not integrated. One piece from one vendor, this other function from another vendor. If you can buy it all in one place, the integration is usually not an issue, and you avoid this piecemeal approach of, okay, we'll get this feature from over here, we'll get this feature from over here. We wouldn't want to buy the body cameras from one location, buy from one vendor, buy the in-car cameras from another vendor, and buy the redaction software from another vendor, and expect those to all communicate with each other easily and without issues. And so buying an integrated system from a vendor that sells it all is the preferred approach. And essentially, that's been our review to this point. What we're looking to do is provide a recommendation for a system that that addresses the desires of our community for transparency in the police department, and the police department certainly wants that as well. But also a system that is sustainable, that we can utilize for years and years to come to help and solidify, establish, reestablish, and continue the confidence of our public in the police department to provide them with the most effective, equitable law enforcement service that anyone in the country is experiencing. And that's our body-worn camera system.